In the years since you had your experience with Don, a lot of things have come along. You know, we have wing sails now, and foils, and there are a lot of new toys.
Right.
What happened to the kite boats? Is it just because the
That's a good question. That's a good question, you know? I mean, since the days of doing it myself, I mean, we really early on were like blew our minds like, wow, this is initially just fun, just a new kind of fun.
Uh-huh.
And then after experiencing the different dynamics by which the kite moves the canoe, it was very enlightening to realize you don't even know what you don't know when you open this can of worms, because so many of the dynamics are different than a sail. While you're still utilizing the wind, obviously, to propel you, the dynamics by which it pulls, where it pulls from, the angles you can create from that pulling, or the nature of how the kite pulls was like just like, whoa, what? Hold on, what? You know, and I was no accomplished sailor by any means, but familiar with sailing.
Right.
You know, your average, you know, beginner, intermediate type sailor. I could go on a Hobie and fly a hull and do the real basic stuff, no problem. But experiencing the kite and how it moved the canoe around really, and you probably don't even realize it at first, like your first time you go.
Mm-hmm.
You're not tapping in and understanding everything that's going on, but every time you go, you're like, oh, wait a minute, if it's doing that, then that means this must be happening, which sort of initiates a whole chain reaction of thought. Well, if it's doing that, then it must be doing this. And even if you don't completely understand that chain reaction of thought, you're aware that all of these things you don't know, all of a sudden, you don't know them, whereas before you didn't even know you didn't know them.
Right.
Ultimately, still don't know or understand everything, but at least you're aware you don't know it anymore.
Yeah.
And so to go through that process, and I did it several times, and you get more familiar with it and figure out how to utilize it and how to take advantage of these different dynamics that are going on. But what blew my mind was how powerful a essentially small amount of surface area in the kite could generate so much power, and how it dictated where the canoe would go. Like if we were going to jibe, as the steersman in the canoe, there's very little I would do. All I would have to do is make sure we're not turning right when the kite decides we're going left. You know, as long as I held a straight line, or maybe tried to initiate as I saw the kite coming over to go into a left-handed jibe or whatever, you know, I'd poke a little bit. But when that kite changed its angle of force, or however you refer to it, you literally would have to grab the canoe, tighten your neck muscles, because if the kite flyer sent it as quick as he could send it, you might be going 15, 20, I don't know what. It seemed really fast.
Mm-hmm.
That way, and in about half second later, you go on the same speed that way. And so nothing I had done to that point had ever come close to such an immediate and drastic direction change from your source of power, your kite.
Right.
And I'm not exaggerating when I say you better hold on to that canoe and get your neck ready to snap, because it was full on. You know, we're all hanging out the canoe to the right because it's going that way, and it wasn't that uncommon to lose people on jibes because they weren't holding on. And with the canoe without any rudders or dagger boards or anything like that, it can just spin across the surface of the water so quickly, and boom, you're off and running the other way before you even know what happened.
So, prior to that, had you had much experience in, say, a holopuni, a sailing canoe?
No, I had zero experience in a sailing canoe.
It'd be interesting to compare the.
I have since been in a sailing canoe,
Okay.
and I loved it. It was a great experience. But I was the dummy they put up in the very front and said, "Don't stop paddling until we say so." So we're flying along, and I can barely get the paddle moving fast enough to not get ripped out of my hands as we're going through the water. And then, we finished the race, and like, "Why'd you paddle the whole time?" "Because you guys never told me to stop."
In application to kite boats, kites and kite boats, do you think there's an underlying reason why we don't see them? Is it expense, complexity? Granted, especially on Maui, we only have 3-4 boat ramps and only 2 marinas, and there's no commercial space available or private space available for private individuals. So is it a combination of the things, or is it just that there isn't an interest? There hasn't been something to garner the interest of the public?
That's a really good question, and I don't, again, not being heavily entrenched in kite boating.
Right.
Recently, a lot of my thoughts are speculative and kind of draw on my past experience, which was a while ago. But I think sailing is such a traditional sport and such a traditional culture.
Yes.
I would imagine that has some bearing on the level of acceptance to alternative, new concepts.
Well, we saw the same problem years ago with catamarans and trimarans. They were barred from races.
Exactly.
So maybe...
And that's, to me, barring of those crafts and races, that's just a holding on of cultural norms.
Yes.
And not advancing, because if your goal is to achieve the fastest racing craft you can, you let go of those cultural norms and you move forward with what works best.
Right.
And so that's got to be a factor in why hasn't been more discovery or more development in kite boating, I would imagine. And the most important ingredient of all of that is bringing to the table an open mind.
Yes.
Because if you don't have that open mind, then you're restricting yourself of what you can potentially learn, which means you're going to impede your progress. So you got to have that open mind. You got to be willing to take chances, fail, because as you all know, all knowledge is good knowledge, even if it's the wrong knowledge.
Well,